Emily, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you?
I am doing good. How are you, Ben?
I'm good. I'm good. I know we just talked about this just before we started recording, but we have to acknowledge that you've got a really cool surname, a very on-brand space name. Um, how do you say it? Is it
It's
Apollonio?
Apollonio. Yes.
Apollonio.
Yes, and the first few letters spell Apollo, so it's very fitting, yes.
No, I love it. I think it's awesome. Um, well, look, let's just dive straight in because you are the CEO and founder of Interstellar Performance Labs. Now, Interstellar is probably my favorite space film. Um, did the name have anything to do with that, or was it just uh, obviously the literal sense of just preparing people to go interstellar one day? Where did the whole idea come from?
Yeah, well, it's actually one of my favorite space films as well. I didn't really have any correlation to that other than just I liked the idea in the sense of just always looking outward, and from this like interstellar perspective, I think, and that's kind of how the name stuck. So yeah, it just kind of fit well with what I wanted to do. Interstellar Performance Labs, essentially, it's how we perform and operate in these isolated, confined, and extreme environments, and eventually in an interstellar environment. So
Yeah. How did the idea come about? Was it do you have like a journey that led you to that moment that this was a cool idea? Is there a sort of talk about it sometimes as an origin story? Was there a moment where you sort of started to become fascinated with the cosmos and started thinking about these ideas of being in space and how one might prepare for being, you know, in space for
yeah.
an extended period of time?
There was definitely a journey. So I was going to school for aviation, human factors in aviation. I was doing everything online. I did my bachelor's and my master's all online while I was an aircraft accident investigator. I graduated about the time of the pandemic, and I was like, okay, this is really not something that I want to do with the rest of my life. And I think, along with everyone else during the pandemic, we all had like this epiphany and like we wanted more for ourselves, right? And so I started kind of looking out more into something that was more challenging and more vast, and that was, of course, space. And so one thing kind of led to another. I also have a background in fitness and coaching as well. I was a competitive athlete in CrossFit for quite a while. And so I kind of took all this like human factors, accident investigation, fitness, and athleticism into the space industry, trying to figure out, what my calling was, what my passion was. And I participated in the International Space University Space Studies program in France in 2021. And that's where I started hearing about the term of analog astronaut. And I was like, what is this? As most people might think. And after the program, obviously I was very fascinated with the human performance aspect of things in any kind of environment. But after the program, I kind of had this realization that I needed to move on with something that really set my soul on fire. And I just wasn't finding that. I ended up applying for an analog mission, and there was really no like preparation that went into that. I was kind of like a little lost puppy. It was like the first time, I was really getting my feet into this. I had heard about it a little bit. I had consulted with a few individuals who were curious about human factors in these extreme environments, but I had never actually done a mission myself. So I was like, why not? I applied, I got accepted. And during my analog mission, I kind of had this epiphany where everything that I had experienced in my life kind of came full circle. And I was like, this is what I was meant to do. This is what I want to do. And that was help people really thrive, have a great experience, and create safety within these confined and extreme environments that really mimic what settlement on Moon or Mars might be like. And so that's kind of a very short story version of how all of this kind of came about.
Oh, that's really cool. And I guess ironically, the pandemic was a bit of a sort of analog experience in that, everyone got a taste of what it was like to like not leave your house. I mean, obviously, being in a house or a flat is slightly more spacious than a small ship on a 90-day mission to Mars. But yeah, it was a sort of funny time to start that. What would you define as an analog mission? Because I know sometimes there's, like NASA are looking for analog astronauts at the moment for like a year-long study. Like some of these are pretty full on. Where does what's the sort of technical definition of it? Is it literally just a simulation? Obviously, you can't simulate zero G and that sort of thing. But what are what makes an analog mission not just the kind of themed holiday? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, actually, one of the initiatives that I started about a year ago was putting together the international guidelines and standards for space analogs. And we actually published our first standard in November of 2023. And one of the biggest discussions within our committee team was defining what analog mission was, defining what an analog astronaut was, and those sorts of things, because I think that it can be pretty broad. It really just depends. But essentially, an analog mission is something that mimics the environment of another celestial body or space exploration for the purpose of human spaceflight and also research here on Earth. So it's essentially this confined environment that really mimics what that other environment would look like while also conducting research.
Mm. And what are the some of the key challenges faced by analog astronauts?
Oh
Obviously, you've
gosh.
got I mean, you assume that people aren't claustrophobic, otherwise you wouldn't necessarily sign up for one of these. Um, but what are the main challenges? Is it the physical restrictions? Is it the sort of mental being bored? Uh, what would you say is kind of the most common feedbacks? And how do you prepare people to be
Yeah.
ready for these challenges?
Well, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head. And one of the challenges, I think the initial challenge is the lack of an awareness of the efforts, risks, and responsibilities that go into these missions. Now, ESA and NASA, they do these analog missions, and they have a pretty rigid selection process, training process. They're highly monitored. A lot of the selection criteria for those missions are very similar to actual astronaut selection. Whereas these independent habitats is a little bit more loose, which is why we kind of created what these guidelines and standards look like to provide more of I guess, a roadmap, sort of say, to help people with these environments. So that's kind of the initial challenge. Is not necessarily it's not initially being in the environment, but it's what are we aware of when we go into the environment, because anybody might say that this looks like a great challenge. This will be a fun experience. It'll be the checkbox to get me to become an astronaut. But then they get into the analog mission and they're like, oh crap, like what am I doing here? I didn't
Mm.
expect this. I didn't realize that these were going to be the things that I would face. And so that's the first thing. But then I think when we're in these environments, depending on the objectives and the scope of the mission itself and the duration, there's the physical elements. High seas is an environment that I'm very familiar with. High seas is an analog mission in Hawaii on a volcano, on one of the slopes of a volcano. And you walk around during EVAs on, lava rocks. And so there's a lot of instability there. And so strengthening kind of like those joints and your balance and stability is really important before you go into these types of environments. So I would say physical. You're also carrying equipment, and you're wearing a spacesuit, and you're wearing a helmet. So your range of motion is very limited. Looking down at your steps, you can't simply do that as if you would. You're just walking around on a hike. You have to kind of really hinge over and look at your surroundings and like turn your whole body while also supporting the weight of a backpack that you're carrying. So again, definitely physical, but the mental, the psychological part would be like, how do we actually operate when we're in these environments? We never really know until we're put into that situation.
Mm.
There is kind of a level of boredom. You're kind of disconnected from social media and your family and things like that. During my mission, and every mission is different, but during my mission, we were only able to communicate with friends and family via email. And so that was pretty limited, and that was for 30 days. So And I'm married and I have kids. And so there was definitely a challenge with that. But you also have the team dynamics and the cohesion of everything, depending on the individuals and the personalities that you have. Even if you do get along great, sometimes there can be those personalities who are really timid to address conflict, and then it continues to kind of just build upon each other. And so you also have that as well. And so I think physical, psychological, sometimes an understanding of like emotional intelligence as well. So that's like emotional intelligence within yourself, but then having an awareness of other people, because sometimes it's easier to recognize that in other people than it is within our own self. And we kind of depend on our team members, our crew members, to really help support our mental well-being. So I mean, yeah, there's lots of those things that kind of come into play, and then just finding your roles and your responsibilities within the team is another challenge as well. So
Yeah, for sure. And I imagine, like, even being without your smartphone for a couple of weeks is going to be a challenge for a lot of people. It almost becomes
actually,
like a
actually
kind
found
of
it quite
rehab.
nice. Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually found it quite nice. I feel like I'm always overstimulated with getting messages and things like that. I kind of had this effect of like, wow, this is, I have a lot of free time and I'm not being bombarded. And it was kind of a chance for me to really reflect and think about my life and my perspectives, where I've been and where I'm going, because a lot of that was a little bit removed. All of those external factors and external influences that are constantly being put on us, as society does, that was all kind of removed, which it was a little bit enlightening to have that experience.
Mm. And obviously, as space tourism is becoming a reality, and now we're on the dawn of potentially thousands, hundreds of thousands of people being able to go to space, even if it is for a low Earth orbit experience. How important is the preparation? Because it's kind of like if you were going to do not even Everest, but if you were going to try and climb a pretty high mountain or hill on Earth, you should probably train for it a little bit and do some stretching and build your stamina and that sort of stuff. So if someone was to go on a Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin experience, would you recommend that they do some sort of preparation for that? And how important is that for the average person that may not have the kind of drive to do it? Although I guess if they are signing up at this point, they're probably pretty committed anyway. But
Yeah.
what are you trying to do in terms of fitting that niche, really? Sort of taking someone that has no experience in space flight and being a bit more prepared.
Yeah. Well, I mean, flights like Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, they're a very short amount of time, at least right now. And I think with those types of experiences, there is a physical toll that the body takes, because you're going through a lot of different G forces, and kind of preparing that. But there's a lot of a psychological component to that, because you're experiencing the overview effect, as Frank White kind of defines that. But you only get that short amount of time. Astronauts who are going to the ISS, they're there for weeks or months, and so they really have a chance to like absorb it all and soak it in and reflect on it while they're there. So in these shorter duration space flights, especially when we talk about like commercial space flights, preparing for what that experience is going to be like is probably the most fundamental thing that we could probably do to really enhance their experience and this reflection that they have when they come back to Earth. People are paying so much money to do this. It's such a, it's becoming more popular and more accessible, which is great, but it's still kind of one of those once in a lifetime experiences for most people. And so when they do get up there, how do they make the most of this time? How do they really take in what it is that they're seeing? I mean, if they can't get their buckle undone in, it takes them 5 minutes to do that, they've just lost 5 of their 15 minutes that they get to really take in all
Mm.
of what this overview effect has to offer. And so I think that, Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic does a really great job at training, procedures and things like that. But when we look at preparing for these environments, how are we going to mentally prepare for, fully experiencing and immersing ourselves into that experience, so that when we come back to Earth or come back from wherever it is that we are actually experiencing that moment of awe, how do we actually translate that to other people? How do we digest it? Because I almost kind of relate it to a feeling of grief, but in an opposite way. And
Mm.
you'll hear a lot of different astronauts. Sarah Sabry, for example, has mentioned that seeing that overview effect, and there was an experience of grief that she had because she didn't know how to. It was really difficult for her to put into words to share with other people because she had this strong emotional sense and feeling that was really difficult to transfer to, kind of out of what she was feeling. So I think mentally preparing on, how to immerse yourself into the experience and fully digest that, and then being able to reflect on it when we come back, to Earth.
Yeah, that's hugely important. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, I don't know, what are your thoughts on sort of meditation and that sort of thing? Because I imagine, if you're preparing mentally, imagine being on a launch pad. I imagine tools like meditation be quite good in terms of calming your minds and not
Yeah.
freaking out when you realize what you're about to do. How much does research-based meditation play in astronaut training? Does that,
A ton.
yeah.
I think meditation is so underrated sometimes. And one of the greatest things about meditation is there really is no right or wrong way to meditate. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. I think for research purposes, depending on what it is that you're doing, there are different methods of meditation that you can practice to achieve a certain outcome. But in a sense, if you're looking to calm the mind and you're looking to really experience, what it is around you, we call this kind of like it's like a groundwork meditation, or grounding meditation, sorry, to really be able to take in all of the senses that are around you and be completely present in the moment. And that's actually one of the things that we do teach during our training programs for analog astronauts is meditation. We do an entire week that's dedicated to conquering the mind and, mindfulness, breath work, meditation, and, mental toughness, those kinds of things, because there's a time and a place where we're not going to be our best self. And we're going to want to really be present in the moment. And so, even just a couple of minutes of reflecting on whatever it is that's coming into your mind and letting those thoughts go really allows you to create space for what it is that you really need to feel.
For sure. Well,
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on the your STAR program as well, which is the Stellar Training for Astronaut Readiness, which is a super cool acronym. Um, how does the tell me about the STAR program and what's that? How does that specifically prepare individuals for analog missions?
Yeah. So, Stellar Training for Astronaut Readiness. I was quite proud of that acronym. So, right now we're focused on 4 analogs, and it's essentially a 9-week program. It's very comprehensive. We cover everything from physical preparation to mental preparation. We do a lot of the emotional intelligence of self and then emotional intelligence of other people. So, having an awareness of others. And then communication, conflict management, team cohesion, and one of my favorites is the human factors in identifying environmental threats. And so this 9-week program was really designed for people to, and I don't want to scare anyone who's thinking about taking this program, but we really wanted to create this high standard for the program. We didn't want it to be something where someone could just take and put it on their resume to make it look good, or put it on an application to make it look good. So we actually hold our candidates to a high standard. They have, discussion responses, discussion posts, weekly exams, group projects, all that kind of stuff that are due at certain times, that they kind of do on their own. And then they have certain deadlines for deliverables. And so we do kind of create this standard within the program. But essentially, what we're doing throughout this program is we're teaching these candidates all of the efforts and the responsibilities that are required when you go into an analog. So, for example, we actually just wrapped up weeks 4 and 5, and 4 was about mastering, nutrition and sleep and things like that. The candidates actually got to figure out the required caloric intake that they would need for their entire crew and the macronutrients to support their physical activity levels for a 2-week mission at the location that they chose. So they choose a location at the very beginning of the 9 weeks as a crew. They actually get to create a mission patch. We work with Tim Gagnon, who is a mission patch designer. He's designed tons of patches for NASA and other commercial space flights and analog missions. And so they design a mission patch that's specific to them to create kind of this camaraderie at the beginning of the program. And then every single week, they have different deliverables that are going to go to their final presentation that's going to be presented live at the end of the 9 weeks. That really helps foster an understanding of what it's going to actually take for their crew to participate in an analog mission, from communication methods, the nutrition, hydration, the physical activity levels, the mindfulness, everything that they need to really succeed in a mission. And one thing that I'd like to reiterate to my candidates is that although we're doing this training, it doesn't mean that nothing's going to go wrong and they're going to have a flawless mission, because that's just certainly not the case. The objective of training is to prepare them for when things do go wrong, giving them the toolkit that they need to manage those and to reduce the severity of whatever it is that kind of pops up.
Mm. And I was just thinking, actually, as you were talking, like, you come from a non-traditional space background, and I sort of don't work in the industry either. And I can think of lots of other industries where these kind of, programs could be beneficial, even in the sort of business sense. I can imagine it's very different when you look at a team and how they, how the different personalities interplay when you're talking about, potentially living together in a simulation like this. Do you think that there's a sort of scope for doing these analog missions for people that aren't looking, to do it because they want to go to space, but just as a kind of unique strategy for, building strength within, executive leadership teams?
Absolutely.
Do you think that's something that we're going to see, is kind of, corporates pretending to go to Mars for a week or 2 weeks,
Yeah.
phones off, roles and responsibilities,
Mhm.
and taking it very seriously? Is that something that's started, do you think, or may start?
I think that it will be starting soon. I think we're definitely setting ourselves up for success to be able to get to that point. There's a few things that I want to mention based off of what you just said. So, something that I do with my candidates, and I never mention this, but I never refer to them as a team, actually. I always refer to them as a crew, because it's really up to them if they're going to be a team. And I can kind of see there's usually a transition when I see them going from a group to a team. And so I think that there's kind of this dynamic that we pay attention to, what actually defines a team, because a group of people is just, we're just all collectively here together. But a team is when we're working together to achieve a common goal. And when you can start to see that shift, it's actually very, very beautiful. And I think a lot of people and a lot of, I guess I could say, groups in the corporate industry, they're all kind of working towards this common goal, but it's not like a realization yet. And we're kind of, a lot of the humanity element is taken out of that. And so one of the beautiful things about analog missions is that you live together, you wash dishes together, you sleep, separate rooms, but you sleep together, you eat together, all of that stuff. And so you're not only working together to produce this report by the end of a deadline, but you're working together to survive and thrive and have a fulfilling life. And I think that's something that a lot of these corporate groups are kind of missing. And once we have like a pretty structured scope for all of these analog habitats, I do think that this is going to be an opportunity for people in corporate to take advantage of these opportunities as a team building exercise, to kind of see what it's like to do that and to kind of bring their team to the next level.
And looking at analog missions in general, what would you say is the typical sort of uh, uh, makeup of a crew? Like, do you are there sort of various things you look for? Because you can't just put a random group of people together. There's got to be some compatibility and people feel comfortable with each other. How much thought goes into, who would potentially go on a mission with who? Is that something that, well, I'm actually intrigued how it works with lots of analog missions, because obviously
Yeah.
you can pay to do it, but also it's got to be a bit thought out. Like, you have to have a good mix and a appropriate one. What's your sort of thoughts
Yeah.
around that?
So that's funny you asked that, because I'm actually right now working on, I'm heading the crew selection for the world's biggest analog that's coming up. And we've just kind of finalized a lot of our selection criteria. But what's really interesting in the analog astronaut community is there is no habitat that operates the same. In terms of selection criteria, some habitats rely solely on, does your research look good and is it going to provide publications? Some look at, if you can pay, you can play. Some are very intensive, where you have to pass a psychometric background test and a medical background test. And so there's such a broad range when it comes to selection. And so that's another reason why the IGSA, the International Guidelines and Standards for Space Analogs, it's another reason why we kind of put these guidelines into place with, there's a section on crew selection. And so one of the things we want to try to continue to uphold is we want to be able to make an accessible space for everyone. So we don't want to necessarily knock people out because they don't meet NASA's astronaut selection criteria, because essentially, one of the great things about analog missions is it's a great test bed for what it's going to look like when we start to send the everyday people to space, and so we don't want to eliminate that. We don't want to eliminate a bunch of people from these analog missions. But with that being said, we do have to have people who are willing to commit to these environments and commit to preparing themselves adequately, not only for themselves, but for their crew members, just because safety is such a big concern. And so I think that, we can't really put in place this structured selection criteria when it comes to like personalities and stuff like that for every single habitat. But we can have individuals who have an openness and willingness to learn, people who have that kind of like teamwork mentality. And obviously having a couple of individuals with those leadership qualities and skills is something that we would definitely look for. But those are things that we can really easily identify in people after working with them over a period of time during the training process, which is why we don't necessarily, from my perspective and what we do at IP Labs, we don't necessarily assign roles until we've actually kind of gotten an opportunity to work with them. And so as long as they have a willingness to learn, they are a team-oriented person, self-motivated, then I think that they are a great fit for an analog mission.
Fantastic. Speaking of roles, as an entrepreneur yourself, what has been some of the biggest challenges you faced in building and growing Interstellar Performance Labs? Because I imagine it's it's a multifaceted thing, isn't it? Because it's not a sort of fixed product you're selling. It's every situation is different. So what has been the challenges? How have you enjoyed the journey so far?
Well, I'm definitely not one to shy away from a challenge. And I think if someone tells me I can't do it, then I am more ambitious than ever to make sure that I accomplish that. That's just my personality and that's in my nature, and I thrive under pressure. And I really think that it's bittersweet. It's a blessing and a curse. And so starting a company like Interstellar Performance Labs, first of all, we're the first company that to do what we do. There's no other company that does human performance training and human factors consulting specifically for analog missions. And so that was the first challenge to navigate. When we started thinking about like TAM, SOM, your target market, and putting together, costs and things like that for like pitch decks and stuff, that was a bit of a challenge because there's not really an industry or market to go off of for something like that. And the other thing is we really needed to make sure that we gained the trust of not only the community, but these habitats as well. So forming relationships was really important. And I enjoy working with every single habitat director that I've worked with so far, and just getting to know them and learning about their objectives and their goals. And, just really kind of finding where we can best support them, because you're right, we're not a cookie cutter company where we can just provide one product and like that works for everyone. You really have to figure out, what works best. So I think kind of managing that and finding our place in this industry has been the first hurdle. But I think, we're coming up on year 3, and we're finally starting to kind of find our groove with what that looks like. But the other challenges are simply just, we're very small startup. And it's like, okay, CEO, founder, curriculum developer, social media guru, you name it, like administrative tasks, all of those things kind of fall on one or two people. And so trying to manage our time and things with all of these really great ideas that we have can be a challenge. So one of the things that we do to kind of mitigate that kind of cookie cutter thing is, yes, we do have our 9-week program for individuals who are just looking to, improve their skills, or looking to participate in an analog mission. But we also provide workshops specifically to pre-selected crews who are about to go into a mission. So depending on what their research objectives are, for example, if they're looking to do research on team cohesion and they're just trying to see what that looks like, maybe they don't want us to provide training on team dynamics. Maybe they just kind of want to see what happens there. And so our training would look very different in that aspect, according against something else where we would be providing team cohesion training. So I think finding our balance and finding our place in the industry was probably the biggest hurdle.
Absolutely. And I guess you sort of come into it at a good time, because with the the Artemis missions and private companies flying the flag for space, it's certainly becoming, it seems like it's a lot more in the public consciousness, definitely in the States and starting to be elsewhere as well. You mentioned the largest analog mission. I assume, is that over multiple analog bases as opposed to one giant analog?
Yes.
Tell me about that. What's the aim of that? How are you involved in it?
So the world's biggest analog kind of transpired from the Analog Astronaut Conference, where we were all kind of just talking about what this looks like. And it kind of came about, we wanted to create the first simultaneous analog mission, because when we do these analog missions, we have maybe 4, 6, maybe up to 8 people in a habitat. So our sample size is very small when we're doing research. In this context, our sample size is going to be approximately 60 plus people. Because we're going to be able to, we have 9 habitats on board. Each one can support approximately 6 people on average. And the mission's going to be about 28 days. So we'll have an opportunity to really conduct a large spectrum of research on a larger sample size. And not only will our sample size be larger, but we'll also get to do research on how these small crews operate together, because there's going to be opportunities where they have to communicate with each other. They're going to have, the same challenges, some of the similar challenges. And so they're going to really have to work together for communication and resources and things like that. And so that's going to be really cool and really exciting. My role in all of this is crew selection and training. So we just released our applications. They close, round 1 closes on March 15th. And then round 2 will open up on April 1st. So applications for that are still open right now. But we're going to go through a selection criteria where we're selecting candidates. And then from there, during the training process, like I said earlier, we're going to go through and do an evaluation where we're going to start to select our core crews and our backup crew members. And so we'll have kind of a hybrid approach when it comes to training, and it's going to be virtual. And then we're also going to be doing some on-site training as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, if anyone's listening to this and they are considering doing an analog mission, I think if you're able to and you've got the time and everything lines up, I think people should definitely go for it. It's one of those things that I've thought about doing, but it hasn't been right. I can't get time off work, even though it's my own company. But I really hope to do one day. The right opportunity will come up. What final bit of advice would you give to anyone listening that is perhaps thinking about doing an analog mission? What should they just jump in and go for it, or what sort of research should they do to find the right one for them?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So definitely, I think for some people, there's kind of this hesitation because they're like, maybe I'm not qualified, maybe I'm not, physically ready, or whatever it might be. Maybe I don't have a great research idea, because a lot of the times these habitats require you to kind of bring your own research in. But I definitely would say just go for it. The other thing is do your research on the mission and the habitat that you're actually applying to, because you do want to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. The analog astronaut community provides a lot of great resources. I am always sharing a lot of resources on my Instagram and on my LinkedIn. And then I'm happy to answer anybody's questions if they have any about getting involved in these missions, especially if they need help trying to figure out what they should do for research or, anything like that. We can definitely help provide them with some ideas. I think the majority of habitats, their qualifications are just, 18 or over. Some of them are 21 and over. More of those are in Europe, but 18 over, 21 and over, bring a research experiment, and, be able to have a good time, take some time off work, and be team oriented. So yeah, definitely research and then preparing for the mission itself.
Great advice. And I'll put those socials in the show notes for anyone to click straight to. Emily, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Ben.